This happened on Halloween night in 2019. Me and three of my friends, Dennis, Eddie, and Adam, were out doing what most 14-year-olds would do on Halloween: get as much candy as possible. Afterward, we hung out at the bowling alley and played a few games there. I was the one in the group who stuck out like a sore thumb. Eddie and Adam were dressed in all black, donning skeleton masks, and Dennis was wearing a latex Michael Jackson mask. However, I was wearing a bright red and black Spider-Man costume. This will be important later on, so just keep it in mind. After we bowled a few games, we decided to go to another nearby neighborhood to prank a couple of people we knew. Not anything dangerous, we would just knock on their door and scare them. However, when we approached the first house, this is where things took a turn for the worst. We rang the doorbell and waited for an answer. All of my friends were in the front yard, waiting to jump out. I was crouched below the fence by the pathway that led to the street. A car then pulls up across from me, with its windows down. I noticed two men in the vehicle. One was a skinny guy, and the other was much larger and more intimidating. Not wanting to give off the impression that I was up to no good, I gave them a friendly smile and waved to them before putting my mask on. Moments later, nobody answered the door, and the car was still idling across the road, so we decided to go elsewhere. We made our way further up the street and noticed that the car started moving again, keeping pace with us but maintaining its distance. At this point, Dennis, Eddie, and Adam had caught on to the fact that something was wrong. So we turned into a dark alley that went uphill. There was no lighting, so it was pitch black. About halfway up, we looked behind us to see if we were still being followed. What we saw sent a sharp feeling of dread up my spine. The larger man was marching up the alley. We took off down the alley and made it to the other side and started down the hill and into another neighborhood to avoid the men. This is where I realized that the shoes that I had on were awful. It was basically just a rubber sole with nothing on the inside that would secure my foot in place, so it would slip out of the shoe with every step, making running impossible. We tried everything. I even tried to piggyback off of one of my friends, which proved useless despite me being the skinniest, so I had no choice but to hop my way down the street. Meanwhile, the large man had reached the end of the alley. He crossed the street and waited. Soon, the car came around the corner and pulled up, and he got in. We were just about to turn the corner when the car came speeding onto the path in front of us, nearly running me over. This is where I decided to stay where I was with my hands raised above my head. The others took off without me. I don't blame them. It was a fight or flight situation. I pretty much accepted that I was likely going to be murdered. The large man then got out of the car and started yelling, "Get your fucking friends back here now!" The skinny guy still in the car had already caught up with them. They eventually let us go. It turns out that they thought we were a different group of kids that apparently were throwing eggs at their car. Me and my friends retreated back to the bowling alley and called our parents to come pick us up. That was enough for tonight. We were thoroughly terrified about being hunted down by a couple of creepy-ass guys. While we were waiting for them, we saw that same car pass us again, 3 more times. And even after me, Dennis, and Adam left, Eddie called us to say that he saw it pass 1 more time. Something that still bothers me about this whole situation is that I want to know how they could have mistaken us for another group of kids. I was wearing bright red spandex, for crying out loud. I doubt whoever they were pursuing that night was wearing something similar. Also, the fact that they circled us after the encounter makes me question what they were really up to. I believe that we all narrowly escaped a gruesome fate on that Halloween night.
This happened on Halloween night a few years back. It was a chilling 60 degrees out that night, but was still nice enough to have the windows cracked while cruising down the road. Me and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, wanted to do something scary to get ourselves in the Halloween spirit. So after doing some research online, we discovered an abandoned Girl Scout camp on the outskirts of town. It was closed down due to a fire that resulted in the death of a young girl back in 1975, and her spirit supposedly can be seen wandering through the forest nearby after midnight. Around 11:30, we packed up and headed out. I knew that homeless people sometimes like to camp in the cement structures to get out of the weather, so I made sure to bring my metal baseball bat. There were 8 of us in total, myself, my girlfriend, and 6 of our friends. We drove 3 separate cars there. On the way there, I noticed a white cargo van parked under a bridge next to a lake, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. We eventually turned down the secluded road that led to the forest trail. We parked, exited our vehicles, and pulled out our flashlights, then headed down the path towards the old ruined building. After 30 to 45 minutes of messing around, pretending to scare each other in the dark, advancing further into the woods, we suddenly heard the crunching of leaves. We all stopped in our tracks and listened. We then heard my girlfriend's car horn sound off in the distance. It occurred to me that I'd left her windows cracked, and someone was now reaching into the car and activating the horn. After the initial shock, we all began sprinting back. Wielding the bat, me and one of my other friends took point and cautiously approached the area where the cars were parked. I saw a shadow duck behind one of the cars. I then told my friend to shine his flashlight towards that spot, and we approached the car but saw nothing. We quickly checked the rest of the area, but nothing was around the vehicles or inside them. We then heard the sound of tires skidding to a halt, and saw the white van blocking the only exit. 2 of my friends sprinted to their car as a man stepped out and approached us. Well, something about him felt off. I noticed that his right hand was buried into his jacket pocket. "Do, any of you have a lighter?" the man asked, his hand never leaving his pocket. Well, alarm bells were going off in my head as I suddenly felt vulnerable. What good would this bat do if this guy had a gun? We slowly backed away and made our way to the car, quickly locking ourselves inside. "Why are you leaving? We're not the cops." The pale moonlight illuminated the man's sickly smile as he stood in between the cars. "Now, which one of you fuckers has a light?" Just then, my friend started up his car, causing the man to look in his direction. I took this as my cue to fire up my girlfriend's car, and we hauled ass out of there. It turns out there was just enough room for our vehicles to make it past the van. We sped down that country road as fast as we could and made it back to my place in record time. And I have no idea what that man had planned for us or what he had in his pocket, but it couldn't have been good. If you're gonna have an adventure on Halloween night, just remember to be careful and pay close attention to your surroundings, especially when you're doing something potentially dangerous. You may just get more than what you bargained for.
Me and a friend of mine who I'll call Josh and a couple of our friends went to a Halloween party on October 30th of 2018. We all decided to go as characters from the Purge movies. We all had on these smiling LED masks. Josh's was the only mask that had a green light. This will come into play later. There were 5 of us, and we all indulged in alcohol. Josh got so wasted that he couldn't even stand up. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning when we decided to call it quits. Since I had the car, and was the only one out of the group who didn't drink as much as the others, it fell to me to drive everyone else home. I had to walk Josh to his front door, because he fell on his ass as soon as he got out of the car. After he got inside and closed the door, I dropped the rest of my friends off and then went home. It was around 5 a.m. when I woke up to my phone ringing. I looked at my phone to see that it was Josh calling me. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and answered. Hello?
Hey, I think there's someone in my house.
Josh's voice was extremely hushed and panicked. My heart dropped. He went on to say that he heard footsteps in his living room and got up to see what it was. He then heard someone rush out of the side door. He said he was now hiding behind his bed with the door to his room locked. I couldn't believe my ears. Josh lived in a pretty big house in a safe neighborhood. I never thought anyone would have the balls to break in. You need to call the cops, I told him. That should have been his first call, but remember, he was still heavily intoxicated. He called the police from his house phone, and I stayed on the line with him until they showed up. The cops found footprints on his carpet and his side door wide open. He was so drunk that he must have forgotten to lock it. Of course, there was no sign of the intruder anywhere. The cops then told Josh to lock all of his doors and call back if anything else happened. It was now Halloween. I went over to Josh's house to help him pass out candy to the children. It was around 9 p.m. when the parents started telling their kids to come inside, mostly because it was a school night. We were packing everything up when we heard a tap on the window. The blinds were closed, and we could see a green light coming from the other side. I slowly approached the window and opened the blinds. What I saw terrified me. Standing on the other side was a man brandishing a knife, but most disturbing of all, he was wearing the same LED purge mask that Josh had on the night before. The man let out a horrifying laugh before he started banging on the window like a lunatic. We just stood there in total shock. Eventually, we ran out of the room and grabbed the phone to call 911. We then heard someone screaming from outside. I'm guessing some passers-by saw the man at the window and got startled. The man then took off. When the cops got there, the only description that they could give was that he was wearing a green light-up purge mask. As far as I know, the guy was never caught. The moral of the story is that you should make sure your doors are locked at night. Halloween sometimes brings out the crazies.
Strap in, folks, because this one is going to get crazy. During the 90s, my life was very complex. I'm ashamed to admit that I was part of a satanic cult back then. Now, this story isn't about dissecting my former beliefs, or how I went about practicing my former religion. This is more of a cautionary tale about the unforeseen consequences of being a part of a cult. To be perfectly honest, I never really took Satanism seriously. At the time, I was just a confused young woman from a broken home, looking for a sense of belonging in all the wrong places. I was desperate to be a part of something, and I found a group of people with whom I seemed to connect with. If I had to say and do certain things to maintain these new friends, then so be it. That was my mindset back then. And as they say, hindsight is always 20/20. Anyways, it was the fall of 1994 when I met my first long-term boyfriend. His name was Seth. I met him at a mass gathering that took place in Portland, Oregon. We seemed to hit it off straight away. He and I had a lot of mutual friends, and it turned out that Seth only lived one town over from me in Northern California. Everyone seemed to be happy that we found each other. We started seeing each other on a regular basis after the event in Portland. For the first couple of years, Seth and I had a beautiful relationship. I'm not ashamed to say that those were some of the best days of my life. However, As time went on, Seth became more and more devoted to his religion. It consumed him. It got to the point where it began to put a strain on our relationship. To give you a better understanding of the hierarchy of our cult, the entire community was divided into sects. Some of these subgroups practiced Satanism differently from others, but we all had a common anchor. I hope that makes sense. Seth was an apprentice, you could say. His superior had fallen ill, and naturally this meant that Seth had to take on more responsibilities in his absence. I helped him the best I could, but it was around this time that I started to have a major lack of interest in Satanism. I would even go as far to say that I thought the whole thing was ridiculous, but I was so handcuffed to it because I was so in love with Seth. So I kept my indifference to myself. I found myself faced with a very difficult reality. I would never be able to distance myself from this cult without losing Seth. I was forced to watch him become more and more obsessed with the cult as time went on. Halloween was a very special night for us. I would look forward to the holiday every year. Believe it or not, our particular sect did not require any ceremonies or worship on Halloween. We were free to venture and enjoy the spoils of the night, as we used to say. Seth and I would always spend the evening together and act like a normal couple for a change. However, on Halloween of 1999, everything would change. It would be the night that I left Satanism forever, but it came at a cost. Seth told me that he had something special planned for us that night. I was very nervous because I had planned on telling him, in so many words, that I was no longer interested in being a part of the cult and I wanted out, but that I also wanted him to join me so we could start a new life together. But Seth had other plans. We drove out to a secluded peak that overlooked a beach. It was one of those spots where couples would come and look up at the stars. He had taken me there before and would usually bring his guitar. We'd sit together on the beach and sing some old Elvis Presley songs. Seth was actually a very good guitar player and had an amazing singing voice. We got there at 10:30, and as soon as the car was parked, Seth turned off the engine and turned to me.
Rachel, do you love me?
Of course I do, Seth.
If I asked you to be a part of something, would you be?
What are you talking about, Seth?
I finally found a way that we can serve our Lord together for eternity, and I need you to promise me that you will take this journey with me.
Seth grabbed my arm and gripped it tightly.
Promise me, Rachel. Promise me.
I was immediately frightened. I'd never seen Seth act so erratic before. Okay, Seth, I promise. Please let me go. You're hurting me.
Please don't be like all the others. They lack conviction, unwilling to do what is necessary. Our Lord is not one of the light, but through the light, we can join him in darkness.
Seth then struck me hard in the face, causing my head to hit the passenger side window. I blacked out for a short while. When I came to, there was something that almost immediately snapped me out of my daze and set off every alarm bell in my head. The distinct smell of gasoline. As I looked back over to Seth, he was holding a red canister over his head and was dousing himself with gas. I looked down at my lap to see that he had already drenched me in the substance as well. As he set the canister down on the floorboard, he trembled his final words.
You promised me, Rachel. You promised me. I'll see you on the other side, my love.
He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a lighter. What followed next was the most terrifying and intense moment of my life. It was like a scene straight out of a movie. Time itself seemed to slow down as Seth struck the spark wheel of the lighter. However, the lighter did not ignite. I quickly fumbled for the door handle and managed to open the car door. As I fell backward out of the vehicle, the last thing I remember seeing was the horrified look on Seth's face as he struck the lighter again. The instant the lighter ignited, the car was completely engulfed in flames. I scrambled to my feet and ran away from the burning car. I'll never forget Seth's haunting wails as he was burned alive. have no memory of what happened next. I woke up in a hospital the next morning, surrounded by nurses and police. I'll spare you the details of the police investigation. It went about as you would expect. Satanic panic was still a thing in America back then, and although it died down significantly in 1999, I still got a lot of dirty looks from both the hospital staff and police officers when the word got out that I was part of a satanic cult. Speaking of which, no one from my sect came to see if I was alright. I had already decided to leave the cult at that point, but I couldn't help but to feel left down by my so-called friends. After I was released from the hospital, I returned to the house that Seth and I shared. It was only then that it finally hit me. The love of my life was gone. I spent the next couple of months crying myself to sleep. I was all alone. No one there to help me. Of course, I had to attend several follow-up interviews with detectives who were convinced that I had more to do with the death of my boyfriend than what I was claiming. Fortunately, they had no evidence to support their theory and the case was closed. I eventually reconnected with my mother. In the time that I had been gone, I discovered that my abusive, alcoholic father had died in a car crash in 1997, and my mother had turned her life around. I ended up moving back in with her and restarting my life. For a time, things were okay, all things considered. I was seeing a counselor, got a well-paying job, and was even starting to make new friends. Normal friends. Halloween eventually came back around, and for reasons that should be obvious to everyone listening, I was not in the celebratory mood. My mother had moved houses after my father passed away, and she now lived in a more secluded area that did not have any trick-or-treaters, which I was grateful for. When Halloween night came, I went to bed early because I had to be at work early the next day. To make sure I got a good night's rest, I took a sleeping pill and passed out around 8 o'clock. I woke suddenly after a short time later, covered in a cold sweat. I remembered the room was unnaturally cold. In the glow of my nightlight, I could see my breath evaporate into the air as I exhaled. I looked over to the clock on the nightstand and saw that it was 10:30 p.m. A dreadful, nauseous feeling overcame me as the events that happened exactly 1 year prior echoed in my mind. After a few moments, I gathered my wits and decided to go to the kitchen and grab a drink of water. When I reached over and turned on the lamp on the nightstand, I was confronted by something that would, yet again, change my life forever. Standing in the corner of my bedroom was a severely burnt man. Melted flesh dangled from his face as his body pulsated from his drawn, gaspy breaths. To this day, I'm still surprised that I didn't scream. Maybe I was in so much shock that I physically couldn't scream. The horrifying apparition glared at me with eyes that had no lids to them. After a few more exaggerated breaths, the thing finally spoke to me.
"You promised me, Rachel. You promised me."
I only managed to stutter a single word before my own fear overcame me, and I fainted. Seth! I wish I could tell you that this story has a happy ending. It's been 21 years since that fateful Halloween night on the Peak, and ever since, on every Halloween night, that same burnt man appears to me. Sometimes he's standing in the corner of my bedroom. Sometimes I see him under a streetlight as I drive past. Sometimes I see him in my rearview mirror, sitting in the backseat of my car. I'm still not entirely sure if this burnt man is the restless ghost of Seth or if it's all just in my head. I've seen many therapists over the years, and no matter how many drugs they prescribe me, the burnt man still comes back every year. After 20 years, I've learned how to live with it. I no longer allow it to traumatize me. However, there is still one thing that I've never been able to get used to. Whenever Seth returns, he always says the same thing. And every time I hear it, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up.
"You promised me, Rachel. You promised me."
I was reading somebody's Reddit post today where they talked about their mother being scared because she heard 3 knocks and related it to the 3-knock omen, which I had never heard of. I decided to do some research on it, and apparently there's a superstition around hearing 3 knocks because it's supposedly followed by a death in the family or someone that's close to you. That has happened to me. A couple years ago, I went to a mountain resort in California for a little over a month and stayed with my sister and brother-in-law who lived there. Around the same time when I came, they got a new roommate. He was a nice guy, maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, an ex-alcoholic, but overall, just a really great guy. I spent a lot of my summer going on hikes and playing video games with him and my brother-in-law, and I would say that I got to know him pretty well, but not as well as my sister and her husband did. The roommate, Jack, had lost a close friend a year or so before when he got drunk and decided to fall asleep outside in the middle of a snowstorm, which apparently happens more often than you would think. Since then, Jack had never so much as touched a beer, and he was quite proud of it. Anyways, it was around my 3rd or 4th week there, when my sister and I were watching The Babadook, and it was pretty late at night, around 1, maybe 2 a.m. The movie ended, and she was going to let me sleep in the room with her since Jack and her husband were out camping or something, but I don't really remember what they were doing. It was silent in the house, and all the lights were off when we heard 3 loud, distinct knocking sounds. I asked her if she had heard them, and she said yes, but it was probably just the dryer making noises upstairs. It was a fairly new dryer that didn't make any sound. Maybe around 10 minutes later we heard the same 3 knocks again, but my sister wrote it off to the dryer being noisy once more. It didn't sound like a broken dryer, since it was 3 obvious knocks, though. I don't want to go too far into the history of the house or anything, but it was definitely haunted. Things would randomly fly off of shelves, and the lights would randomly turn themselves off. Also, some of the furniture that the house came with had what we thought were blood stains. I wrote that night off to the spirit in their house messing with us since we were watching a scary movie, up until today, when I put everything together. 2 days after I left, they found Jack dead in his room upstairs. They said he drank himself to death, which was surprising considering how proud he was of getting sober. Maybe the death knocks were real, or maybe not. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. What do you think? Also, I should probably also mention that he had a bad liver from his previous drinking problem. I don't really know how that works, but I guess one night of extremely heavy drinking did it for him. I didn't push for more information about his death since it really shook my sister up. All she said was that he drank himself to death. Disclaimer. In no way am I saying that death knocks are 100% real, or that if you hear them, a family member or friend will definitely drop dead. As for the furniture that we thought had blood on it, it might not have been blood. Maybe it was just an odd-colored stain from where something had been spilled. I'm not saying that I'm sure that Jack's death was related to anything that happened in the house. I just made the connection and found it fascinating. My grandparents died about 10 years ago. They both died peacefully of old age and left an old house in a countryside. That house has a lot of great memories. My best Christmas and birthdays. Despite that, recently I've started having nightmares that would always have the house in them. Sometimes someone's chasing me, other times there are ghosts. It's always basically a horror movie scenario. Being religious, I thought it was about time to visit my grandparents' graves and light a candle. It's about a 3-hour drive, so I decided to visit them and crash at their house for the night. Well, I'm never doing that again. It was still bright outside when I arrived. I went inside to open the windows and clean up a bit. That's when I heard a weird sound. It was as if someone was walking in the room, but no one was there except me. I was spooked, but I convinced myself that there must be rats or other creatures in the attic. I managed to stay calm and rational, and spent the rest of the evening watching YouTube in bed. That's when the fun started. The internet connection is terrible there. You kinda have to walk around the room to catch 4G like some sort of Wi-Fi. Like many times before, my internet lagged and I ended up sitting in silence. This is when I heard it, loud and clear. There was someone in the kitchen, and they turned on the light switch. I was sure it was that switch, because whenever you turn on the light in the kitchen, it made this loud click sound. I literally froze. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I was about to be killed by some maniac. All the knives were in the kitchen too, and I only had pepper spray in my bag. Then the intruder started walking, slow steps as if they were just wandering around. I thought I will die from fear, and I didn't know for how long that I was frozen, but it really did feel like forever. I was literally waiting to be killed. I don't know how much more time passed, but it was long enough that my muscles started spasming from being so intense and not moving. I gathered all courage, hoping that the intruder had left, and somehow managed to go to the kitchen. The light was on as expected, but the person had already left. I ran to the door, expecting to see it wide open, but to my surprise, it was shut down and locked, as I had left it. There was no sign of entry. I'm never going back alone. I want to start by saying that I'm no stranger to odd dreams. I have experienced sleep paralysis many a time throughout my life. I had a dream shadow stalker for years, and I used to have a haunted bed frame that gave me some of the worst night terrors I've ever had. I have shaman blood on my dad's side, and I myself have been studying various aspects of the occult and paranormal for over a decade. But those stories are for another post. I'm just used to this sort of thing. I wanted to express that. That leads me here. Not sure if anyone's felt this as well, but I have been a ball of anxiety lately. Obviously related to the uncertainty in the world and all, yet I still shouldn't feel it this much. The dreams I've been experiencing have been extremely strange. Like I said, I have vivid, lifelike dreams constantly, but typically they're broken up. I have been having Inception-style dreams for the past 2 months every time I go to sleep. Like I'll dream of actually waking up and going about my day, but then I actually wake up. It's so disorientating. Last night, I had a very weird dream. The strangest of them all. I can't recall what I was doing, but I remember distinctly being in a dark, dusty room. The only part I truly know is that there was some kind of box or container with a lid in front of me. Everything was in first person. It felt so real. I lifted the box, and laying in it were 2 dead gray mice. They were stiff and curled towards each other, like a heart almost. That's all I can remember. I only remembered specifically because my significant other said something about a mouse this morning. I did some investigation and read that this could mean a period of financial instability, but was curious to see if anyone else had any ideas. I am a sensitive. I have seen and experienced the paranormal since I was little. My experiences range from surprising to scary and can happen anytime. I don't control it. The one thing I can count on, though, is something almost always happens to me around Halloween. I'm sure most people know that Halloween is the time when the veil between the worlds is thinnest. It's not just that day. Sometimes as much as 2 weeks, before and after Halloween, the veil is thin enough to severely affect sensitive people like myself. I have a few sensitive friends and know that some can even feel the veil as it thins. Responses to the veil range depending on sensitivity. I have experienced lucid dreaming, vivid dreams, and severe anxiety. I do have anxiety, which I have medication for. Last Halloween, I had a panic attack come out of nowhere. I was shaking and could hardly breathe for no reason. I barely made it back to the car, and I know that it was because of the veil. I don't usually have those attacks since starting my medicine, and I went back to the same mall a few months later and experienced no anxiety. I don't remember everything that happens on Halloween, so the experiences I do remember are usually among the scariest. I'll start with the ones that happened the longest time ago. That Halloween I had a few things happen to me as expected. I can't remember them, since they didn't really stand out. This experience was more creepy than scary. It was either Halloween night or just after. I couldn't sleep, so I was playing on my phone in the dark. I decided it was time to make myself sleep, so I put my phone down. When I did, I saw a dark, cat-sized shadow jump at my face. I jerked back, thinking that my black cat had jumped up on my bed. I never felt her land on the bed, though. I looked around for her just to realize that she was asleep on the other side of my bed. She would have had to climb over me to lay there from that angle. It took me a while to get to sleep that night. The next one is my sister's experience. It happened either that same year or a little after that. She isn't as sensitive as I am, so her experiences are fewer but stand out more. She was riding home with her boyfriend from the Halloween gathering that they had gone to. It was dark, of course. When he pulled into the driveway to their house, she said that the lights landed on something large that was running on all fours. It was humanoid shaped. He didn't see it. She told me about it, and I told her it was fine. She was inside, and I told her not to go outside again that night. Last Halloween was my most active one. It was about a week or so before it when I had my panic attack. I also had several lucid dreams, and one very vivid dream that I still cannot convince myself it was just a dream. I also saw much more than ghosts. I have a job that requires me to go to customers' houses to try and make contact with them. That was what I was doing when 2 of these incidents occurred. I can't remember if they happened on the same night or not, but it was just before Halloween. I was on dimly lit back roads in my small town. In my town, most of the back roads are dark, so I was lucky to have some extra light. I rounded a curve and my lights lit up something standing on the other side of a fence. It was a gray mass that seemed almost two-dimensional. The best way to describe it would be almost like the reports of Bigfoot. It was taller than a human, but shaped similarly. It was not Bigfoot, though. It had no definition to it. I believe it belonged to a different place. I drove faster after seeing it, and took a different road back. The next thing that I saw was very similar to the previous creature, except that it flew. I was in my own car. With the way the windshield slants, I only saw it for a moment. It was almost like a pterodactyl, but it was gray and had no definition, just like the other one. I describe it that way for lack of a better way of describing it. Obviously, I don't think we have extinct flying dinosaurs in my small town in Tennessee. These 2 creatures sound absurd, I know, and even I would have a hard time believing someone if they described them to me. My last experience of that Halloween was the most terrifying experience that I have ever had around Halloween. I was pulling into my driveway at night after getting off work. It was late, and everyone else would have gone to bed by then. It was the first time I had seen something like it, and hopefully the last. I understand why my sister was freaked out that time. A large, humanoid creature on all fours was running through the yard. I only saw it for a few seconds, but it was close. It was big, maybe twice the size of our chocolate lab. Once we passed each other, I didn't see it again. Needless to say, I made a mad dash into the house and wouldn't let the dogs out to use the bathroom. I'm an atheist, not very superstitious, but my family are big believers and have always claimed that our house was haunted. So about 2 hours ago, I fell asleep in the guest bedroom. Everyone avoids that room, but I like the ambience, so I've been spending a lot of time in there lately. I should probably note that there's a mirror by the bed. So first, I thought my mom walked in, and I remember saying, "Get out!" I know I heard the door open. I just asked her if she went in, and she didn't even know that I was taking a nap. Then, as I was sleeping, I heard whispering and scratching sounds. I started remembering things that never happened, and I could envision a lady with black hair sitting on the couch in the room. I knew I needed to get the hell out of there, so I tried waking up. The dream was so vivid that I thought I did wake up. I looked around the room, and written in red everywhere was murder, death, etc. There were also red tally marks all over the walls. There was a doll on the floor, a life-sized cloth one, and that's when I knew I was still dreaming. Suddenly I look over to the couch, and there she is. It was the lady with black hair. I tried waking up, but at this point I was experiencing sleep paralysis and I couldn't open my eyes. Finally, I woke up for real and ran out of that room. I don't ever want to go back. Anyone have any ideas on what happened? Am I overreacting? Edit. Okay, I'm getting freaked out now. I just woke up. It's 5 a.m. to another dream. This time I was in a normal world and felt like I was being watched. I kept telling everyone, but they wouldn't believe me until I fell asleep in the dream. Something or someone pulled the blankets up and laid down next to me. I'm not joking. Someone please help. I don't know what's going on. I had a gut feeling that it was that thing again. I woke up and had to call my mom to come in. This is getting weird. For someone who doesn't believe in God, I want to call an exorcist. I have been fascinated by ghosts and the supernatural my entire life. I've had a few experiences here and there, but this one in particular was the most significant and frightening. First, some background. My dad's side of the family is Native American, and some have a deep suspicion of owls. They're considered evil omens. Anyways, my grandmother was very, very attuned to spirits. She had the so-called second sight. She had a whole wealth of stories about her encounters with the paranormal, who she passed on to my aunt. But anywho, this next bit is relevant. A few months before she passed away from lupus, she woke up in a panic and came running into my aunt's room. My grandmother was generally a stoic, unflappable woman, so this was not like her. She dragged my aunt into her bedroom asking if she heard it. My aunt heard nothing. What my grandmother had heard was the so-called death owl. She passed on not too long after that. Fast forward about 10 years or so, I'm up around 4 a.m. watching TV. As I recall, it was around December of 2008. I heard this noise outside. It sounded like a woman weeping. The best way I can describe it was a voice that was caught between an owl's cry and a human's. It was very unnatural. I got a cold feeling in my gut because I knew exactly what it was, and it scared the ever-loving crap out of me. I remember being paralyzed with fear. I grew up out in the country, and I know what an owl sounds like. I've also heard bobcats, foxes, and the dying screams of rabbits. This was none of those things. Others have tried to claim that it was just an animal, but it was like no other animal I've ever heard. That unearthly wailing noise, like it was in mourning. It was the kind of sound that freezes the blood in your veins. At the time, I thought it might be foretelling my father's imminent death, since if you hear it, it either means that you or a family member is going to die, or it predicts great disaster. And for clarification, at the time, my dad was having some significant heart trouble, but he's much better now. Now comes the twist. On April 9th, 2009, a huge wildfire swept through my area. A lot of houses burned down, and mine was among them. When we came back, my home was nothing but a pile of smoking rubble. It took me a bit to make the connection, but I am positive that the death owl, or banshee, was an omen that predicted this disaster. One thing's for sure, I hope to God that I never hear that thing again, because I will never forget it. I have a suspicion that this thing stalks my family. I can't be certain. I'll have to do some research into my family tree. I know this might sound unbelievable to some, but I swear till the day that I die that this is all 100% true. So there you have it, folks. My most significant paranormal encounter. So, I've always had hyper-realistic dreams. I also have always believed that my dreams are how God talks to me. I know that sounds a little crazy. Regardless, the other night I had a dream that I believe is a sign. I also should say that my walk in faith has been wavering in the past year, and I've also been going to see psychics a few times a year since last December. Anyway, to the dream. I believe I was on a road trip with a couple of my buddies. We stopped at a little diner in a small town that had a psychic, gimmicky store attached to it. I was waiting for my friends to use the bathroom, and when they both came out, they both said that they wanted to go and do a reading. I said all right, and that I would wait for them to be done. They went through this black-lit corridor through a purple-curtained doorway. They came back out not too long after, all smiling and cheerful. They told me that I should do a reading, but something didn't feel right. I've always been sensitive to energies in general, but there was something about this place. They kept tugging me when all of a sudden the psychic came out. Immediately, all the alarms were going off in my head. She came up to me and got really close to my face. She had these bulging eyes, and her face was full of super white makeup, really heavy eyeshadow and eyeliner. Her hair was a fire truck red, and slicked back into a bun with feathers and things sticking up. She was really freaking me out, but I was like, alright, whatever, so we start. She grabs me by the shoulders, and we make very intense eye contact, and she starts telling me a bunch of things like I have the gift, something that I already know. And we start backing away almost like a dance, and then we both get on all fours and drop down on our bellies, and she starts to slither toward me. Literally, slithering, without using her hands. This is when I know something is actually really up. I stop everything, I stand up and am telling her that I'm done. She is still slithering toward me. She then slithers all the way up my body until her face meets mine. Then she says, "Let me show you the way." I say no. This makes her super angry, and she picks me up by my throat and keeps chanting, "Let me show you the way, let me show you the way." She starts running with me in her hand, and the room keeps elongating, so she keeps running. Then snakes start coming out of her sides, and they burrow into my skin. I feel the pain of them digging into me and biting me. I'm grabbing onto her wrists, and I scream, "No! There is only one way, God is the way." And I scream this while making eye contact, and she starts screaming bloody murder, and I get the strength to gouge out her eyes with my thumbs. More snakes and spiders begin pouring from her eye sockets, and I scream that again, that God is the way. And that's when I woke up. This story happened in October of 2004, back when I was still a third-year high school student. My friends and I stuck around the school late at night after our annual Halloween party. We had agreed to try out my friend's Ouija board. It wasn't the brightest idea, but we needed a thrill. We found a nice spot under a huge Nara tree and proceeded with our half-assed ritual. There were about 5 of us, 2 boys and 3 girls. We were all expecting some kind of paranormal contact. Rumors had it that our school was haunted, but we'd never really experienced anything firsthand, and it was Halloween when all the spirits came out to play. We all wanted to get spooked. Also, we've never seen a Ouija board firsthand before, so we were really stoked. Our school was an old Spanish colonial house built in the 1800s when the Spaniards still occupied the Philippines. We were in a section of the school that doesn't get used often. Located beside a creepy old Jesuit house, people only go there when they needed to use the restroom, store equipment on one of the sheds, or make out with their boyfriend/girlfriend. We sat down in the middle of an open space, with only an exposed, bare bulb nearby illuminating our surroundings. We were all having a laugh, scaring each other with what-if scenarios. It was your typical dumb kids doing dumb things kind of night. My friend who brought the Ouija board proceeded to place it in the middle of our circle. If I remember correctly, it was the glow-in-the-dark version, which we found hilarious, but it did give us the ability to see what was written in the dark. Not knowing what to do, and going after what we've only seen in movies, we all proceeded to place our index finger on top of the planchette. We sat there looking at each other until one of us said, "What's next?" We didn't know if there was a proper way to start the ritual. Plus, the board didn't come with instructions, so we decided to just throw in a question. "Is anyone there?" I called into the darkness. "If there are any spirits living here, please speak to us," one of the girls joined in. We clearly had no idea what we were doing, and still, nothing happened. Not even the slightest bit of wind. One of my friends jerked the planchette, and the girl who brought the Ouija board screamed, breaking the silence. We all laughed at how ridiculous that it was. After a bit more joking around, we decided to give it another go. We all placed our index fingers on the planchette once more and asked, "If there's anyone there, we would like to make contact." "Don't break the circle," one of my friends jokingly said. "Shut up," I whispered. We were just about to get ready to give up when the wind started to pick up. The stillness broke, and the darkness around us seemed to move. Just a coincidence, we thought. "Okay, don't break the circle," I said. "Is anyone there?" I was excited. It was like a scene from a film with dirt and dead leaves swirling all around us. "Guys, I'm scared," my friend sitting beside me said. "My mom warned me about playing with forces that we don't know." "Did you die here?" I asked. "Were you killed during the war? Are you the headless priest that roams these halls? Do you know Jose Ritzel, our national hero?" "Are you a hottie?" my friend giggled. At this point, we were all throwing out random, stupid questions, and there was still nothing. "This is bull. I don't want to do this anymore," my friend said, exasperated. We were all thinking the same thing. Just then, a group of dogs from the neighboring house started barking at us through the chain-link fence. These 6 dogs were growling and showing teeth. We all screamed, and without finishing the ritual, bolted right out of there. We didn't see each other until after Halloween break, and this is where the story gets really creepy. One of the girls told us about a weird experience she had the night after playing with the Ouija board. She had gotten home late after hanging out with her friends from the neighborhood when she realized she forgot the keys to her house. So she called up her brother, who was then still sharing a room with her, and what he said crept the hell out of her. He swore that she was already home. He claimed to have seen her walk in a while ago, and that she looked really tired, and that he saw her head straight to bed. Weird, but no need to freak ourselves out, was all we really thought about it. Besides, her brother must have just been tired and seeing things. But then my other friend started telling us about an encounter that she had that Halloween night. She was going up to her room when the lights began to flicker as she was ascending the staircase. She shrugged it off, blaming it on faulty wiring. But just then, she saw the door to her room open, and a dark figure stepped out and stood atop their staircase. She couldn't make out the entity's face, but she recounted that she couldn't move, and felt utter dread as the figure stared down at her. "No way," my best friend, who just joined in the conversation, said in disbelief. "Something happened to me as well." He recalled that he was sleeping one night when he woke up feeling really uncomfortable. He described his vision as having TV-like static, and that there was a feeling of heaviness that surrounded him. He looked around the room, and that's when he saw a bloody, charred face with piercing red eyes grinning at him through the window. I couldn't believe what I was hearing because I had an almost run-in with death that night. After the ritual, I was sleeping in our sedan on the way home after fooling around with the Ouija board when I felt our car jerk. I woke up instantly. Looking out the window, I discovered that we had been hit by a huge oil tanker. I panicked and leaped out of the car. Luckily, my mom and I survived the crash since the front of the car was a total wreck. I still don't have an explanation as to why those things happened to us, but I'm thankful that nothing else happened after that. I've never played or gotten near a Ouija board since. In 2015, I worked a couple weeks at one of those Halloween stores that are in town for the season. This particular location was in an old Kmart building that had been empty for a number of years. A particular problem for this building was the homeless population breaking in to have a safe place to sleep out of the cold. My first day, I was put in the back area, shuffling stock onto pegs. Being my first day, I hadn't met everyone, so when I saw movement out of my peripheral vision, I didn't pay much attention to it. Way off in the back corner of the building, outside the double doors going into the old stock room, I saw a man. He was very tall, maybe 6'3", Hispanic, with long curly dark hair, a dark complexion, white t-shirt, and blue jeans. I figured it was simply a coworker that I hadn't yet met and didn't think anything of it. A few moments later, I looked up, and the fellow was gone. A shift later, I'm an opener. Our manager tasks a coworker and I with going into the old stock room to look for a cart for stock. We get back there, and a motion-activated light in the hallway on the other side of a swinging door turns on. Then the next. Then the next. My coworker freaks and says, "Oh crap, it's probably another homeless person who broke in. Come on, let's go catch them and make sure the back door is locked." So we chase after the movement. We get into the hall, which has a door on either side, to see no one. But in the next area where the back door is, the lights turned on. We run in there, and a stairwell leads up from this area to the old offices. The lights going up the stairs start turning on like someone is going up, but there is no one there. Not a rat, a moth, or so much as a cockroach to trigger the motion sensors. We double-check the back door, and it is securely chained and locked. My coworker turns white as a sheet and says, "That's it. I am done. We're the hell out of here." A shift or two later, I ended up in the back area again, shuffling stock around. From my peripheral vision, I see the same man again, but this time he's maybe 15 feet away. I pay attention this time, and could make out the detail pretty well. His clothes were dirty, and he wasn't wearing shoes. The guy was just standing there, though, not moving. After a few unnerving moments of seeing him there in my peripheral vision, I look directly at him, and he's no longer there. That's odd, I thought, not connecting the dots. I just shrug it off and continue working. My final shift was on Halloween. I'm sorting merch between carts, putting broken stuff in one cart and resellable stuff in the other. The next thing I know, someone is standing a foot away, directly in front of me. Looking down at the cart between us, I can see him perfectly out of the corner of my eye. I could see the grime on his clothes, I could see his breathing. I knew in that moment if I looked up, he wouldn't be there. I suddenly got irrationally angry, a type of anger I've never felt. I said to him without even thinking, "I know what you are, I know what you're trying to do. I'm not afraid of you. You are not welcome here. By the power of the priesthood, I command you to leave, now." He growls one guttural growl, and then is gone. No fading out, no puff of wind and smoke, just gone. At my current job, a year or two later, one of my coworkers and good friends is a devout Catholic. I told him about the ghost of the homeless guy in the Kmart building, and he just stands there and stares at me. Do you have any idea what you did and how dangerous it was? You exorcised it. You're not a priest. You should have never been able to do that. You're damn lucky it was just a ghost and not a demon. I never even considered that, nor did I consider my words before I spoke them to the ghost. It was spontaneous, like muscle memory, or like I was being guided. My friend still says I was lucky, and not to do some stupid crap like that again. The dream I just had was one of the most prophetic that I have ever had. I have gotten into the habit of listening to historical documentaries while I sleep, and one of them just made its way into my dream. Let me explain. I was sitting on a bed in a broken-down old house when I started hearing an animal screaming in pain outside. I run to the window, and I see an older man, and who I can only assume is his wife outside this house, with a strongly malnourished panther that is on the ground in front of them. The older man has a whip, and is raising it up before I yell to stop, and the panther jumps up, climbs up the side of the wall to my window, and the large jungle cat climbs inside. I start to close the window, and the man starts to scream to give me his animal back to him. I only flip him the bird, and then turn to help the animal. I leave to go get some meat and a bed and whatever else I think the animal might need when I get back. It's nighttime. I walk back in, and I see the panther laying with his head on my pillow, asleep. I turn around to put the stuff down and close the door, and when I turn back, he's sitting up, staring at me. I apologize to him for waking him up, and I show him the meat. I tell him that I don't want him chewing on me next time he gets hungry, and he says, "I couldn't." At this point, I'm completely caught off guard, and I just stare at him. He continued, "You saved me. I would never eat you. My name is Ramses." I smile at him and introduce myself while placing the meat in front of him. As he finishes up, he looks up at me and says, "Thank you. I wish I could be here on happier terms. but I have a message about this world and all of its humans. This world will have to face judgment in an endless desert. So much was given, and so much was ruined. Now there will be nothing. I'm sorry. I let him know that I understood, and I thank him for his message. Suddenly, the house around me begins to shake and crumble. Just before a large piece of wall falls on me, I wake up. "10 years ago, when I was 14, myself, my cousin, and a friend all had what I can only describe as a demonic experience on Halloween. I wanted to see if anyone else has had anything similar happen or knows what this could have been. So, Halloween 10 years ago, the three of us decided it would be scary to walk through the woods nearby where I lived. I knew my way around well, as I had grown up going there. We were all walking along chatting as we approached the middle of the woods. By a hollowed-out tree, I see a yellowish glow. I stopped where I was, and my cousin and friend also stopped. I just stared at this glow as it got brighter, and they did too. We all glanced at each other with a WTF look on our faces. I'm literally thinking I'm imagining things or something like that, but they both confirmed that they were seeing the same exact thing that I was. In the glow, a young girl appeared. She looked to be about 8 years old and appeared to be dressed in Victorian-era style clothing and had pigtails hanging down on either side of her face. She started off looking quite washed out in color and kind of transparent. She became more of a solid-looking shape, and the glow got brighter. As we're watching this, we're all whispering and confirming that we are indeed seeing it. As the glow in the girl became more prominent, I went from feeling normal and in disbelief to feeling uneasy, then fear and dread, then finally like we needed to get out of there and that our lives were possibly in danger. I can put into words all the feelings I felt, but none of them are good enough. And I've never felt anything like it. I could tell my cousin and friend felt it too. The glowing thing then moved closer to us. There were no footsteps, no sounds, no nothing. It then looked and felt as if it were dashing at us, and it was literally so close in front of us I shouted, "Run!" We all grabbed hands and sprinted past it toward the main road where there was lots of light. We stopped briefly as we turned, and couldn't see anything, and then suddenly it was there again. It was fast, and we could all see this glowing person-like shape rushing toward us. Again, we ran as fast as we could until we could see the main road. I glanced behind, and it wasn't far away at all. I grabbed my cousin and friends again, and started pulling them down the steep hill as the main road was at the bottom of it. We stumbled and half fell down this hill, but all managed to keep getting to our feet. I'm sure this was down to pure terror and adrenaline. We got onto the path by the main road and looked up at the woods, and the glow was there, clear as day, at the top of it. It wasn't coming toward us at all anymore. We caught our breath and were ranting about it to each other, all confirming again that we had actually seen and felt what we did. The glow was still at the top of the hill. It was as if there was an invisible boundary that it couldn't cross. We turned away from the woods, and when we looked back, it had moved behind a tree. It was almost as if it stood there watching us, trying to hide. We stood at the bottom of the hill, by the main road, looking at it for about 30 minutes, maybe longer. Eventually it was gone, and I saw a slight glow in the distance of the woods, followed by nothing. We returned about a week later because we all knew what we had seen, but we wanted to check to make sure that there was no possible light that could be shining there. It was literally pitch black. No light was visible, and we retracted our exact steps. I don't think this was paranormal, but it felt so real. that it undid many of the knots in my heart. My father passed away 21 years ago, when I was 20 years old, leaving behind his mother, my grandmother, wife, my mom, and a daughter, me. 2 years before his death, my father had urged my grandmother to sell her small home and shift with us so that we could look after her in her old age. He built a decent house, considering he came from a very poor background, that we had to sell off after he passed away. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. I often used to think about how our life would have been had he been still alive. He was an honest man, but in a powerful position. When he passed away, I was still in college and unmarried, with no exposure to the outside world. Had he been alive for a few more years, I could have used his guidance to fulfill my career plans. He was the only earning member of the family. After he passed away, nothing remained the same. We all struggled financially, emotionally, and ultimately physically. Then I got married to a verbally, financially abusive man. But I saw this dream only yesterday, never before it. I had not been thinking about him or of any of my difficulties before I went to bed. In the dream, I was in my grandmother's house, which again we had sold 23 years ago. She had passed away, but my father was alive. He was sadly looking at the empty house from his childhood. I asked him what he planned to do with the house. He said he would probably sell it, but he sounded very sad as he said it. Then I suggested if we should keep the house and just rent it out. This way, we could return to it whenever we want and have a financial backup too. My father said that in the face of financial difficulty, we have a bigger home to fall back on. But he seemed relieved that he didn't have to sell his childhood home. When I woke up, I realized that it had all felt so real, as if I had lived an alternate life. It was what life could have been. I cried, but I also felt that I had been lucky to be able to live in that life. Does anyone believe in alternate lives here? Do you think my soul had made a trip to an alternative life somehow? This happened about 13 years ago. I'm currently 28 and my childhood dog died in early high school for me. This wasn't too long after. Upon looking up what this is, it was most likely a false awakening, but still gives me chills to this day. I shared a room with my older brother, who was a pretty heavy sleeper once he got there. He'd usually be up playing video games all night, and I got used to being able to fall asleep through the sounds of him yelling at COD players for using noob tubes and all that good stuff. One night I woke up feeling the foot of my bed sink in like someone was down there. When I looked, I noticed a small child sitting with his back toward me. The child seemed to be wearing a black shirt with white horizontal stripes. I immediately thought to myself, alright, fuck that, and went back to sleep. I woke up what felt like a few hours later, and he was now standing at the foot of my bed, facing me, holding my dead dog's head in his hands. The child was surrounded by an extremely dark aura, so much so that I didn't gather any details on skin complexion or anything. I immediately lost my shit and freaked out, falling out of my bed. This part creeped me out because the fall was very detailed. I knocked over an acoustic guitar that I had on a stand near my bed when I fell out, and my brother shuffled in his sleep due to the noise. When I tried to wake him up, he mumbled, half asleep, that we needed to get more Pepsi, not an encounter with him that would surprise me at all, and went back to sleep. I then scrambled back into my bed, all while this kid was just watching me, holding my dog's head throughout. I fell back asleep, and then had my real awakening that morning. The guitar was in its stand, and everything was normal. I ended up not telling anybody about this dream. The really fucked up part, and why this particularly bad dream still gives me chills, has to do with the fact that my dog was buried in my backyard, in a little side yard that always had some really weird energy to it. Months later, my friends and I were hanging out, and we usually smoke weed in my backyard close to this side yard area. We had made our way inside and were munching and watching movies when my good friend Joe said that he needed to run to the backyard and get his phone. He went out to get it with his usual demeanor, but I heard his footsteps running full sprint back to the back door into the house. His skin was pale, and he was visibly shaken up. I asked him what was wrong. His response, "Dude, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I just saw a little kid standing where your dog is buried." So for a little background info, I'm a 34-year-old female, my husband is a 35-year-old male, and our 2 daughters are 9 and 10. We moved into a house built in 1900, back in October of 2014. The following year, in 2015, I had quit my job to stay home with my youngest, then 4, and to be available for school runs for my then 5-year-old who had just started kindergarten. Fast forward about a month into the school year of October 2015. One day after I dropped my kindergartner off at school, I took my youngest for a walk through a very old cemetery around the corner from our house. The cemetery is closed to new graves. Many of the tombstones date back to the late 1700s into the 1800s. The autumn foliage was beautiful. I even took a few pictures. My daughter had never been in a cemetery before and was on cloud 9. She's weird and morbid like me. She was running around inspecting the graves, asking a million questions, and as she sometimes does, she informed me about some of the history about specific graves and the people who were buried. She has a tendency to make up stories about things that she sees that have happened that turn out to be facts later on. I'm not claiming that she's psychic, but she definitely has my bloodline in her. We went home, and within a couple of days, weird things started happening. It started out small, like I would feel as if someone had brushed by me walking or something like that, but no one was there. Whenever I was in the basement doing laundry, I started feeling like someone was watching me. Then I started thinking I heard whispers or commotion coming from areas of the house where no one was at. I was also going through a bit of severe depression at the time, so at first I thought I was just going crazy. Then, one evening, I was sitting on the couch with my husband watching TV, and in the corner of the room we both saw and heard something dark and shadowy fall from the ceiling and slam on the floor. I jumped, he jumped. We both looked at each other, and he got up to check and see what it was. But once again, like all the other incidents so far, nothing was there. It was at that time that I confided in him about the brushes, whispers, and commotion. He then informed me that he had heard things too. Like, he would be upstairs in the shower and thought he heard me come home with the kids, the front door open, and then talking, only to find out that no one was home when he came downstairs. He just didn't think anything of it, so he never said anything. At this point, I realized that it wasn't in my head, and that our house was likely haunted. It is what it is. Then, a few nights later, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, maybe around 3 a.m. I got up because I felt wide awake. So I left my room and went out to the hallway when I suddenly noticed my youngest daughter on the first landing going down the stairs. I called out to her, "What are you doing, baby?" She looked up at me with the most frightened face I have ever seen, and she said, "I heard you calling me downstairs." Chills ran through my entire body, and I told her, "Okay, well, I'm right here. Why don't you come sleep in the bed with me?" She ran back up the stairs. The next morning after I dropped my oldest off at school, I called my mom. She's, well, I don't know how to put it exactly, but basically a modern-day witch and also familiar with hauntings and such. So she tells me what I need to do, and to come over and get supplies. The whole thing basically consisted of putting crystals behind all the doors in the house, spreading Himalayan salt across doorways, going outside, and also spreading the salt around each corner of the house and blessing it. and then finally saging the entire house. I'm very familiar with saging, as I've done it before. Everything is going fine until the saging comes. I get a fire-safe ashtray, fill it up with dried sage, light it, and begin the process starting from the upstairs, working my way down. My youngest is with me during this process. I get through the whole house and down to the basement when suddenly the ashtray explodes in my hand. Literally, it exploded. It freaked me out and my daughter. I send her upstairs and I clean up the mess. Meanwhile, the entire time, I feel like someone is watching me. At that point, I immediately called my mom and told her what had happened. She then decided that she would come over and resage the house. We got to talking and trying to figure out what was going on, what caused this sudden haunting after a year of living there. We came to the conclusion that it was likely many factors. The veil is, after all, its thinnest during the month of October, Samhain, which basically means the connection to our world and the supernatural grows stronger during this time. I've always been susceptible to the supernatural since childhood. That's another story. And my depression likely brought out anything that was laying dormant. And that my youngest daughter possibly brought something back with her from our cemetery trip just before all this started happening, or awakened something when she was there. After that, everything calmed down and basically went back to normal. On Halloween that year, just a few days after the saging and whatnot, we were with a group trick-or-treating and my friend told me to tell everyone about what was going on. The mass consensus was that we should burn the house to the ground, but that was of course just a joke. We did not, and virtually nothing has happened since. When I was about 5 years old, I used to have these scary, recurring dreams that always had the same old woman in them. The old woman had gray, curly, short hair, and she was always wearing a creepy black dress with lace on the hems. In the dreams, she would always be trying to scare me. It seemed as though she took pleasure in scaring me. A prominent one that I remember is her sitting on top of me whilst I slept, with a basket of flowers. She would just stare right at me. So only about 3 or 4 years ago, when I was about 16 or 17, that same exact woman appeared in my dream. Same scary vibe and everything. What is super creepy about this occurrence is that I hadn't thought about this woman or talked about her for so many years. It was totally random for that to happen to me. Plus, this recent dream was just as vivid as the others. Almost as though she was visiting me again through her own free will. Another thing that might not have anything to do with the dream is that when I was a child I had a black dress just like hers that would hang in my closet, and I didn't know where it came from. It always creeped me out because it looked like the scary old woman's dress. I can't remember where I got it, but I might have worn it to my grandmother's funeral, who died when I was 2 or 3. I was 14 at the time of this story. My mom was a pretty hardcore Christian. She went to this church for a long while, and every year they had this drama called Hell Night. It was during the week of Halloween, Halloween being the last night to do it. Basically, it was a drama where a certain made-up character would die and be judged by God and show what their life was like, and on and on. Anywho, my mother played a demon in this, and said she had a certain outfit that she had to wear with white contacts and the whole getup. One day after getting home from school, the house was empty. Or so I thought. Out bursts my mother from her room in the back of our long hallway in her full costume on all fours, crawling toward me like she was legit possessed. I almost shit myself. So Halloween night comes, and I decide to stay home from this night of the drama. It usually lasts until 1 a.m. or longer, and I still had school to worry about. So I'm hanging out at home, ignoring the knocks on the door because I had no candy. Well, I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, and I hear my mother's room door swing wide open. I get off the couch and peek down the hallway, and there she is, on all fours, looking dead at me. But I couldn't see her face because the wig was covering it. As she crawled towards me, in my head I was thinking, nice try, but I'm not falling for this again. But this time, it's a hell of a lot faster, and she makes a hard left down 2 sets of stairs into our finished basement. After that, I didn't hear anything else that night. Mind you, my mother was still at our church, in the middle of doing the drama, and she didn't get home for a couple more hours. Typing this brought back that feeling. I can't explain it. But I know that whatever I saw was not my mother. I do believe in the paranormal. Not routinely and not as an explanation for everything, but I definitely believe that some things just can't be logically explained. I've dabbled in divination for the past couple years, which has led me to notice more universal symbolism and omens. Recently, I've seen some weird ones. I was driving around my area the other day and passed a funeral procession twice. It struck me as sort of unsettling and out of the ordinary. I drive around a lot, and I don't usually see funeral processions around just randomly. I was a little bit anxious by it, especially so when I passed the hearse itself, but I pretty much brushed it off. That same day, I was pulling into a drive-thru at around 3 a.m., and a black cat came out of seemingly nowhere. It strolled in front of the car and continued walking into nothing. It felt very rare to see, since I live in a well-populated suburb that doesn't usually have animals roaming about. This morning, there was a black cat watching my window on the windowsill of the house across from mine. As I looked at the cat, it began to thunderstorm. I know it all sounds really small and maybe a touch overzealous, but I couldn't help but feeling odd about these things because of how out of the ordinary that they felt, and silently spooky. Not to mention, all happening in the same couple of days. The closeness of it all made me curious, and I had to look into it, just to see if these things were things that other people believed to be bad omens. In my very unofficial research, I have found that 1. Passing a funeral can be bad luck and can, quote-unquote, hasten your own death. 2. In European folklore, a black cat crossing your path can be unlucky and lead to misfortune and death. Occasionally, however, they can represent good luck, but from what I've found, it's fairly situational. And 3. In Greek mythology, thunder could represent punishment to the humans by the gods, associated with Zeus. Clearly, death is kind of a theme here. All of this just doesn't sit well with me, and it's accompanied by a generally strange feeling that I've noticed prevailing in my mood lately. Something just feels off, you know? My ex-fiancé and his stepmom claimed that his house was haunted. Once or twice a week when I would come over, they would be burning sage next to the door. I never thought anything of it. Connor and I would be cuddling on the couch late at night, 10 or 12 p.m., and we would hear footsteps, but we always just assumed it was his sisters waking up to use the restroom. Anyways, it was Halloween, and I decided to do a spirit box session with Connor's high-power microphone. I'd record for a couple minutes, then listen back to the recording. I did this for a half hour and got nothing. Then I began to taunt whatever it was in the house. I was claiming BS, but nothing was there. I decided to leave the microphone running for longer than normal, roughly 15 minutes instead of 5. I can't remember what I heard in the playback audio, but it was more than just Connor and my voices. I rewound it again to see if we could decipher what the voices were saying. I remember something that felt like a rush of cold as ice wind coming over me, and I couldn't talk. My left arm clenched up, as it does when I'm extremely cold. I tried to explain what was going on, but I couldn't get the words out of my mouth. Connor thought I was just messing with him and told me to stop acting and relax. He tried to force my arm to unclench, but I was able to fight his strength, which had never happened before. I started to panic, and the rest of my body curled into a tensed fetal position. He tried to get me to uncurl, but it still didn't work. I couldn't mutter anything except for Hosanna. This phrase, Hosanna, was the only word I could speak for a solid 5 minutes while this was taking place. I was honestly terrified of what was happening. What scared me was that I could not understand it. I kept saying it quietly, but getting louder the more that I said it. Connor kept asking me what it meant, and I couldn't even bring my tongue to say that until the room became warm again. Then I was finally able to untense my muscles and sit up, and he asked me again what Hosanna meant. In Hebrew it means, God save us, God help us, God deliver us. I was so afraid that I went home and slept with my room light on for the rest of the night. I spoke with him about the incident the following morning, and he told me that he had warned me not to mess with the spirits in the house. He did no such thing, ever. He even gave me the microphone so that I could do EVP sessions on Halloween. This is a warning. Please, please, never taunt spirits. It doesn't matter if you think they are friendly or not. They will mess you up. It is not uncommon for me to have dreams about shadow people or to have sleep paralysis. On this particular night, I had a dream about a red marble, and that an entity was tied to this said marble. I felt that I had to protect this marble and keep it away from people who were trying to get it. The marble bounced out of my hand, and I told the entity to roll it back to me, which it did. Here is the weird part. I remember in my dream picking up the marble, but all of a sudden I was staring up at the ceiling. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a shadow person approaching, and it started to lean over me, looking down. At this point, I have no idea if I'm awake or if I'm dreaming, but I remember saying over and over again, leave, 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 leave. But the voice started to sound deeper and not like mine at all. My boyfriend sleeping next to me shook me awake, and I sat up, calmed down, and went back to sleep. In the morning, I asked what had happened, and he said that I was talking in my sleep and that I had said a sentence that was all jumbled, so he couldn't make out what I was actually saying. This made me feel weird, because if I did sleep talk, I would have thought it would have been one word, over and over. I remember in my dream feeling uneasy and scared. Does this sound like I was visited? Or was it just a really bad case of sleep paralysis? Edit. I also forgot to mention that I told my mom about the dream, and what time that it had happened, and she said that she had had a terrible dream and woke up screaming around that same time. We sleep on different floors, so I didn't hear her do this, but she doesn't remember her dream. This was one of the most frightening moments of my life. My best friend at the time, my brother, his friends, and my friend's boyfriend all went to our local abandoned house, which we call the Witch's Circle, to go ghost hunting. Now, this little abandoned house is actually in a national park called Little Basin Creek Reservoir. But there's actually a story behind this house, which I don't know how much of it I believe. It's said that on Halloween night in the 50s, two guys brought their girlfriends out for a sacrifice. I've gone to the archives, done tons of research on this, and can't find anything to verify this information. This Halloween, when we went out there, we were clearly the only ones present. Our cars were the only vehicles there. You have to drive right past town a little ways and head out a dirt road to get there, and there's only one spot for parking, so we would be able to see if any others were there. As we start making our walk down the trail to the house, I'm holding my best friend's hand. We walked under a tree while the entire time I'm staring at the house and not paying attention to my surroundings like I should be in a dark wooded area. A small branch from the tree that we're all walking under at the time falls and lands horizontally at my feet. I didn't see this happen, but my friend and my brother did. They stopped me to look before stepping over the severed branch. I should have taken its warning and not kept going, but I did. As we got further along and closer to the house, now it's not a super long walk to the house, maybe 120 feet from the entrance, we all stood talking quietly amongst ourselves, and then we all heard a very high-pitched scream coming from the backyard. We stopped in our tracks, and I ran back towards the cars. I've never been more terrified. Ever. It's a sound that I will never be able to erase from my memory. That high-pitched death shriek. There's no way I can debunk this, as we were the only ones out there, and it definitely wasn't the sound of an animal. Especially because it sounded like a human female. I haven't been back there since. Lately, I've been dreaming about pretty weird stuff. I can't remember everything, of course, but I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my ability. About 1 week ago, I started dreaming more often, and I could remember them clearly when I woke up. But after about 2 days, some inconsistencies popped up. At the end of the dream, I would start hearing weird noises. This, of course, didn't bother me until 2 days ago when I woke up very early, about 6 in the morning, and the sound was still there. I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights and noticed that my window cover, a sliding cover since my roof is slanted, was pretty much wide open. My window is right under a streetlight, so I always close it because I need complete darkness to sleep. When I jumped up and turned on the lights in my room, the sound immediately stopped. It's hard to explain the noise, but it sounded like the flapping of a piece of clothing against the window. I'm pretty sure that it shouldn't have happened because that's my only window, and there is never any draft in my room. I decided to just go downstairs and forget about it since I was probably still just half asleep. This is where it got weird. I have a little decorative Captain America shield on the desk in my room, which is next to the door. This is important. I started dreaming normally, superpowers and stuff, until I somehow made it back to my home in my dream, and in my dream I sat down behind my desk with the door open. When I look out of the door from my desk, I see the closet doors from across the hall. In my dream, I remember that I started to fall asleep behind my desk, and I could see out of the corner of my eye that the closet door started to open. When I looked up and blinked, it was all normal again. This happened once more. But the third time I looked up, and the closet door kept opening. So I got scared and threw the Captain America shield at the closet door. In my dream, not in real life as far as I know. And then I jumped out of my bed, scared. When I turned the lights on at, again, 6 in the morning, the shield was gone, and lying on the floor next to me. I was very sure that that shield had been on my desk when I went to sleep. The night of October 30th through the morning of the 31st, myself and the group that I belonged to were invited to do a live investigation with the radio station 93Q in Houston at Spaghetti Warehouse. Spaghetti Warehouse is a restaurant known as one of the most haunted places in the country, and definitely the most haunted place in Houston. Even though I knew this, I didn't do any research on the place before I went, so that I wouldn't be influenced by what I might experience. All I knew was that the place had been a pharmaceutical warehouse during the Civil War, and that a manager had died falling down the elevator shaft years ago. I arrived for the overnight around 10:30 p.m. and was locked in until 6 a.m. I started off just exploring the building and getting a sense of it. The restaurant had 2 floors and a basement. While I was exploring and setting up cameras and sound recorders, we heard something large move in the woman's bathroom upstairs. We went in and noticed that the garbage can was out of place. We moved it back to the very exact spot where it had been and left the bathroom. About 5 minutes later, we heard it move again. I went back in and noticed that the garbage can had been moved about a foot from where we had placed it back before. Obviously, I realized that something was going on, so I grabbed one of the DJs and we went in to try to capture EVPs, or electronic voice phenomenon. Basically unexplained voices or sounds that are too low for the human ear, but able to be picked up by our sound equipment. I placed a camera down and started asking questions to try to get any sort of response or communication. After you've been on a lot of cases, you learn to trust your instincts, and you can almost feel when something is around or not right. It has nothing to do with being psychic, just trusting your intuition when your senses are heightened and on guard. That's exactly what I got. It was the strongest that I've ever felt. It was threatening, and like something was right in my face. I felt many presences before, but nothing truly uncomfortable. I remember staring blankly for a second while not speaking, then saying, "Man, I gotta sit down, I feel so drained," which I did. After about 30 more minutes, we left without noticing much else in the bathroom. About an hour or so passed, and one investigator had his voice recorder move right in front of him, and a few others saw wine glasses shake by themselves. We all witnessed faint shadows move across the windows downstairs where light from the outside would penetrate in. You would just notice darkness block out the light and then move away again. We also heard faint voices throughout the night. The whole place had a very creepy vibe, and you constantly felt like someone was watching you or around you. At about 3 a.m., I decided to take a break and sit at a table upstairs to listen to the audio that I had recorded earlier in the bathroom. Normally, I would have waited until the next day, but because we were with the radio station, they wanted some sort of evidence to broadcast when they went live at 6. But also because I felt so strong about what I had sensed, and I was eager to see if I had caught anything. I sat down and started searching for the spot on the audio where I got the weird feeling, while also keeping an eye out to notice anything unusual going on upstairs. After a few minutes, I found the spot, and sure enough, right after I said, "I need to sit down," there was a faint but clear voice. It said, "Hey, what are you staring at?" This excited me, but it was nothing compared to what I was about to experience. A few seconds later, a sixth sense told me to look up, and when I did, I clearly saw a woman in white, wearing a gown with a bonnet on her head, smoothly walk into the wall. The apparition was about 20 feet away. It only lasted a split second, but it was very clear, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I didn't tell anyone until later so that I wouldn't influence the other investigators. At about 4 a.m., I started taking pictures of the downstairs area since no one else was around, and I planned to eventually make it down to the basement. The first floor felt calm, but there was one hallway that led to the basement that had a weird vibe to it. You felt watched. Nothing came up on the pictures, so I headed towards the hallway and the basement. The hallway was about 10 feet long, and had a door at the end where light would shine through. As I turned to enter, I saw a shadow, as if it were some sort of being, that completely blocked out the light and was very large. It was straight ahead of my face and about 5 feet away. Again, it was only for a second, but I clearly, visibly saw a head with shoulders, arms, and a long lower body. I think I scared it as much as it scared me, because it instantly ran toward me and right by me on my left side. Every hair on my body stood up, and my camera completely shut itself off. For the first and only time, I didn't proceed further right away. I was stunned. Actually, I took a step back to collect my thoughts and fix the camera. It wouldn't work until I completely left the area. I figured it was break time, and took about 20 more minutes. Later on, I went down to the basement with another investigator. For the last hour down there, we experienced cold spots and smaller things, but nothing really that unusual. After the radio show, I packed up and left Spaghetti Warehouse drained, tired, freaked out, and with the absolute certainty that there is life after death. It changes you as a person. In the Wicca religion, they say that Halloween is the day when the dead can freely roam our world. I never believed that, and thought it was always psychic BS, but I'll never doubt it again. Last night was awfully weird. I was in my childhood home, but at my current age. As I opened the door to my grandmother's room, it suddenly swung back and forth while my hands were still holding it from the side, not the doorknob, and it pulled me forcefully into the room and onto the floor. I felt a cold sweat coming on, but suddenly realized that I had to toughen up and shake it off. I screamed something like, "This is my house! You have no right to scare me! How dare you!" over and over again. I came close to the door and would hear a faint, high-pitched, distorted, tee-hee kind of laugh. Then I woke up. I thought it was already around 6 a.m. because that's usually the time when my alarm goes off. As I grabbed my phone, I was surprised to see that the time was actually 3:07 a.m. I already felt partially awake, as anyone who wakes up at 6 a.m. would. Now I have to force myself back to sleep or I'll feel awful in the morning. I play some ambient sleep sounds from Alexa while I observe the room, anxiously expecting something out of the ordinary, but nothing happened. I fell back asleep, and in my next dream, I was at a hospital with a group of people that I don't know, but somewhere we were grouped together. There's about 5 or 6 of us in a room, with a dead person in the bed, covered with a sheet. As I left the room, I saw 2 more of the people in our group suddenly appear in a different room, somewhat helping each other put another dead body into a hospital bed while the family weeps. I went back to see the rest of the group in the original room, trying to position the dead body to sit up. The dead guy is of mixed Chinese descent, a bit overweight, and bald. Then some information came into my head that he used to own a restaurant or a bar. As they moved his torso upwards, they failed, and the dead body dropped onto the floor. This is when things start to get really weird, because the dead guy woke up like he was startled from his sleep. He stood up and started chasing us, accusing us of killing him. His bowels were a mess, and I could see a stab wound on his belly and on his lower back. I ran away in a long corridor and found myself in the nurse's changing room. It had open cubicles like the ones from football players' dressing rooms, with scrubs and casual clothes alike hanging on the wall. I was partially covered in the dead guy's bodily fluids, so I washed up. Then a nurse found me. I looked terrified of what happened, so I explained the situation to her and led her to that room. The nurse came in and started to comfort the dead guy. He began to calm down and sat beside the nurse, then closed his eyes. The nurse looked at me, and without talking, some information came into my mind. I learned that he was a hopeless case, so they just let him lie down until he dies, as he was already in the process of dying when we startled him. After that moment, I woke up, and this time it was truly 6 a.m., 6:30-ish already. I didn't feel any dread as you would in a nightmare. I did a bit of research on dream meanings, but I felt that it didn't fit with me. Then I found out the significance of 3:07 a.m. from the movie The Conjuring, so I thought the exact time was just a coincidence, since it's just a movie. I could not remember the last time I woke up in the middle of the night. It would be very, very rare that it's not worth remembering. But waking up at 3 a.m. with 2 weird dreams will definitely stay with me forever. This is a story my grandma and grandpa told me a while back. I'm originally from a small town in Pennsylvania, and my grandfather was a state trooper for a majority of the time that he lived there before retirement. He took a course on hazardous waste removal. I can't remember his reasoning, but he was trained to be a guy in a hazmat suit who took toxic or irradiated waste away from certain locations. One night, while he and my Nana were asleep, he violently jolted straight up to a sitting position in his bed, still asleep. He pointed to a chair in the corner of his room and said to my Grams, who had been awoken by his movement, "Mary Lou, he's sitting right there in the chair. Do you see him?" My Nana was freaked out, so she tried to get him to lay back down in the bed, which took a few minutes, but eventually he was back to sleeping soundly. In the morning, my pop said that he saw Death sitting in the chair in his room staring at him, and he took that as an omen that he was going to die very soon. About 2 months later, an incident at 3 Mile Island occurred, and the police force out there asked my pop's station to send all of his people there who had hazardous waste training to help get it cleaned up. My pop decided to take 2 weeks off and take a trip to Mexico with my mom and uncle because of the dream that he had had. And when he got back, many of the people that he had known at his office had some kind of radiation poisoning that eventually killed them. I don't tell it as well as they do, but I thought it was an interesting story. I have these dreams sometimes. Sometimes they're warnings, and other times they're just odd. I started noticing that they weren't normal when I was about 8, and I started having the same dream every night. My parents were freshly divorced, and my mom had moved into this yellow house. The heater didn't work, and every window was broken. She wouldn't allow us near the windows because she was afraid we'd get cut. This house was mostly normal during the day. The buzz of the fan above the stove while Mom cooks, me and my sister playing, the TV on, just seemed normal. But every night, that dream would come back. It wasn't a bad dream, just one that I really don't get. A native man, who looked like he was probably a chief based on the headdress, would walk into the house through the front door. He would look at me for a long time before opening every cabinet and drawer, and then would exit through the back door. I had this dream for a week or two before telling my mom, but I went to her one day and I said, "Every night I have a dream that someone opens all the drawers, cabinets, and doors, and it's really starting to creep me out." She looked at me and told me that she had woke up and had to shut every door and cabinet and drawer that morning. Then, when I was about 10, my uncle was hospitalized. All of our family was staying together in one house so that we could all help each other out. Our uncle was a big part of our lives and really kept the family together. The adults went to visit him, and all us kids stayed home with one adult who stayed behind. When they came back, they told us very little about my uncle's condition. They just said he can't wait to be back home. That night, I dreamt that I went alone to find out what had really happened. I walked into the hospital room where my uncle was and I said, "Hey uncle, it's me, your niece. How are you?" And he said, "Who are you? I don't have any family. I don't remember them." I spent the rest of the dream trying to convince him that I was real. It smelled like hand sanitizer and old people. I woke up crying and screaming. I don't know why, but I knew it wasn't just a dream. So I asked my mom and aunt, "Why did you lie to me? Uncle doesn't even remember us." They asked me how I knew. I dreamt another time that my mom was wearing all red. She was so confident and pretty, and I remember telling her in the dream that she looked really nice. And then her boyfriend came out. He started fighting with her, asking why she was wearing that slutty color. "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right? Now you know what? I don't want to be with a woman that dresses like that. Have fun being single." I woke back up, and she was wearing all red. I begged her to change. I said, "Mom, something bad is going to happen," because I remembered how much she loved him, even if I hated him. She didn't listen, and a few minutes later I was hearing, "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right?" All over again. Things like this stopped for a while. Everything was peaceful, and I didn't read into dreams too much. Until last year, anyway. Last year I had a strange dream that my current boyfriend was in. At the time of this dream, we were only acquaintances. We had just barely met. The dream was unlike any of the others, because I wasn't all the way asleep while I was having it, and I found that I could not move. Other things happened too, but I'll get into that later. The dream starts with me walking to the bathroom because I had to pee. Then I make the decision to leave the bathroom door open because no one is home. I have the quick thought to myself, "Don't leave that door open," but I ignore it. It's gotten to the point where it's time for me to clean up and wash my hands. But when I look out the door as I'm about to get up, I see my current boyfriend. His head is tilted to the side, and he's saying, "She's here." He says it very creepily and matter-of-fact-like, but it doesn't sound like him at all. He continues and repeats himself. I say, "Who? Who is here?" But when I engage in the conversation he's trying to have, what he says changes. He starts saying, "Her heart is here." At that point, across the hall from the bathroom, my bedroom door swings open to show me a little girl. But she's not a little girl at all. She took my voice. I tried calling out for everyone, my dad, my sister, the neighbors. Nothing would come out until I called for my mother. But calling for my mother was useless. She lived an hour and a half away. I woke up calling for her. I figured it was a sign to visit, but we weren't on the best terms. Anyway, around the time Halloween was supposed to be celebrated, my cats started acting really weird in my room. I started feeling uncomfortable staying in there. I couldn't breathe in there after that dream. My cats would scratch at the walls, and sometimes would hiss at my closet for no reason. On Halloween night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dreams I was gonna have, so I took NyQuil and passed out in a record 17 minutes. I figured I'd be asleep all through the night, but I woke up at 3 a.m. I saw someone standing next to my closet. It looked like my mom, but I wasn't sure. I shut my eyes and refused to open them because I was terrified. When I woke up, without telling my mom anything about what had happened, I asked her what she had dreamt of, and she told me, "I dreamt I was standing next to your closet. Something's not right about that closet. Maybe you should come visit for a while and give yourself some space from there." I want to make it very clear, I never told her anything about this closet. I didn't tell her that I saw her when she dreamt she was there. I didn't tell her about the girl. I didn't tell her about the cats. So I came to visit after about a month, around Thanksgiving. I had been sleeping in Dad's living room or going to friends to avoid my bedroom. I couldn't wait to sleep in a bed. Everything at Mom's was wonderful. We had movie night, talked about things, and just got caught up. So when I came back to Dad's, I actually hadn't slept. I was so happy to be at Mom's, I had just stayed up the whole time. So when I got back, I was pretty exhausted. I went to my room because I was feeling better about it. I turned on my nightlight, still terrified of the dark, and opened my bedroom door. I will die in a fire before I shut that door when I'm inside the room, and laid down to go to sleep. Instantly, the dream took me, before I was even all the way gone. I felt someone hug me and start to kiss my neck. It felt like someone I knew, and I wasn't bothered by it. But the second I relaxed into the hug, it got tighter and tighter until I couldn't breathe. I realized my nightlight wasn't on anymore, and the faint glow from the hallway wasn't much. But it was enough for me to see the closet door open and these odd creatures come out. Short, undefined. Any lines that defined them were just white lines on their shadowy bodies. I felt that they were going to hurt me, and again I was terrified, but I just woke up, and then it was over. I looked over though, and I realized that my closet door was still open, and my nightlight was off, even though I had shut that door and turned the light on beforehand. My first paranormal encounter occurred on October 31st of 2009. A week prior to Halloween, we had made plans. We heard rumors that the cemetery above our neighborhood was haunted. Some of the stories sounded legit, others sounded highly exaggerated, so me, my cousin Dustin, William, and Tommy decided to go find out for ourselves on the perfect day, Halloween night. Jason didn't find out until the day we were going up there. We weren't planning on having him go with us because he would always get scared so easily, but he begged and begged to let him come, so we said okay. Halloween night, we had a small campfire at my aunt's house that was in her backyard. After sitting there until 11:30 p.m., we grabbed our flashlights and homemade medkits. We walked from my aunt's backyard up through the woods on a big hill until we reached the cemetery. William and Jason argued for a minute about who was going in which direction to check out which parts of the cemetery. Jason didn't want to go with Tommy because he was worried that Tommy would scare him, as Tommy had a reputation for doing such. My two cousins and I began making our way through the cemetery, and we didn't notice anything until we got near the mausoleum at the top. We started getting chills, and then we started hearing the voice of an elderly man saying, "Get out. I want you out." As we moved forward, the voice became more aggressive. "Get the hell out of here. I want you out." I shined my flashlight around, and standing between a tree and the mausoleum was an old man. The three of us just stood there in shock. He looked to be in his 80s. He had a black suit on, glasses, and he just looked down at us with this angry glare. His mouth wasn't moving, but we kept hearing what we assumed was his voice. The three of us slowly backed up and started walking down to the lower part of the cemetery to meet back up with Jason and Tommy. What we didn't know at the time was that Jason and Tommy were on the other side of the cemetery heading to the upper part of the cemetery to find us. We got midway through, and there was an area in the middle with 3 tall spruce trees, and we saw 4 shadow figures moving back and forth between the trees and the tombstones. It wasn't like they were running, more like gliding, and they would just disappear behind the stones and the trees. By this time, we began to hear voices again. We just wanted to get out of there, but we weren't going to leave Tommy and Jason behind. As we were walking, we heard them screaming in pure fear. We immediately started running back up towards the mausoleum, calling out to them, and I started waving my flashlight as we were running. I look up ahead, and I can see them running toward us. When the 5 of us got together, Jason was crying. I asked what happened, and Tommy just kept insisting that he swore he didn't do anything. I look over at Jason and ask him. He was crying so hard he could barely speak. I gave him a quick shake, and he said something grabbed me and pushed me down. Then Tommy said, "We were looking around the mausoleum looking for you guys, and all of a sudden Jason's on the ground kicking and screaming." He proceeded to say that he saw an old man standing at the tree line about 20 feet away telling them to get out. Jason stood there shaking and crying. I rolled up his sleeve, and we shined our lights and saw a red handprint on his forearm. Dustin said, "Okay, that's it. We're done. Let's get out of here." We started walking down, and we saw the old man standing in the middle of the gravel path, only this time he looked worn down. We immediately ran the other way, and there he stood again, right in front of us, and this time he looked even worse. He slowly pointed at us and said, "Get out, you dirty little shits." I screamed at him that we were leaving, and we hauled ass out of the cemetery, down through the woods, back into my aunt's backyard. We sat on her porch, trying to process what had just happened. It was almost 1 a.m., so we decided to head in for the night. William and I went into my house, and my dad was sitting on the living room couch. He asked where we had been. We told him that we were up in the cemetery, and that it was indeed haunted, and we informed him of everything that we had seen. He, of course, didn't believe us. He told us that we just needed to go and get some rest. We stayed up until 3 a.m. and began even questioning our sanity. I had suspicions that there's more to this world than just us, but William was a complete skeptic. He didn't believe in anything paranormal. Until that night. About a month before I wrote this on here, my dad and I were hanging out and he brought up that Halloween night, and as we were talking about it, his demeanor changed. He asked, "When you said that the cemetery was haunted and I said that it wasn't, I lied. It is haunted. I know about the old man up there because both your mother and I saw him when we were kids." I asked if he knew anything else about him, who he was, or why he was there, but he didn't. He said that all he could tell me was that he does not want anyone up there, especially at night. I bought a replica of Ivan the Terrible and his son. An old piece of macabre art from Russia back in the day, and hung it up on my wall in a huge portrait behind me yesterday. It's a rumor or popular belief that the painting is cursed, and I've always been a fan of strange items and collectibles, so that's why I bought it. As I went to sleep last night, I was stricken with nightmares. Terrible nightmares. I dreamt I was in a camper with a friend and we sat down to watch a movie called Pendulum. It was a knockoff of Hellraiser. We began watching it and the computer screen just shut off, and we couldn't get it to turn back on, so we had a collective fuck it moment, and I exited the camper to go back inside to the house, whilst my dream friend stayed in the camper. As I came back out, still during the dream night, with a drink, I noticed blood splattered on the windows and rushed inside. My friend had been beaten to death, and Pendulum was pulling himself through the computer screen. After this, I woke up, and by that, I mean I came to a real-world setting where I was asleep on my couch last night. I attempted to get up and get some water, as I was thirsting after such a nightmare. I made it to the kitchen, cracked it open, and let it hit my lips, and then suddenly, I was on the couch, again. In my mind at that moment, I considered that I had actually woken up. I sat up and walked into the kitchen again, cracked open that same water, when suddenly the refrigerator opened beside me, and I knew I was dreaming then. I woke up on the couch again, real as day, except it wasn't, as I went to drink that water again, and woke up on the couch, again. After this is where it really started to get frightening. I considered that I was stuck in a loop, except this time I went to get up for water and walked past that area with the painting, and noticed that it was gone. This let me know I was still dreaming, and that I had another false awakening. I woke up for the water once more and started across the living room when I looked to an open doorway that I hang colorful beads from, and in the dark room veiled by the hanging threads, was pendulum. That woke me again. This time I ran to the window and looked out to see cops rushing down my small street to the neighbor's house. My neighbor shot and killed her husband in the front yard 2 weeks ago, and that woke me up again. After waking up a few more times for water, I tried to go outside after another loop, except when I opened the front door, it was pitch black. Then car lights turned on and sped toward me. As I was about to get smacked with someone's F-150, I woke up again. At this point, I stopped trying to go anywhere and just kept trying over and over and over to slap myself truly awake. After looping for another 30 times or so, I eventually actually woke up and was relieved. I got that fucking water and downed it in one go. I'm a single mother of 5 adult sons. When they were teenagers, we lived in a century home, beautiful and large with plenty of room for my brood. I should mention, our house was the house that all their friends congregated to. There were rarely nights on weekends and summers that we had less than 6 occupants. I tell you this to try and make you understand that these stories I'm about to tell are the truth and are corroborated by many people. When we first moved in, everything was nice and quiet for a number of months. Then slowly, activity progressed. My sons and I were all having unexplained happenings. They didn't tell me for almost a year because they didn't want to scare me. My first experience was being woken up at around 3 a.m. At first, I was in a half-wake, half-sleep mode. What woke me was a very loud noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like the boys were rearranging furniture, very heavy furniture. Loud scraping, so loud that I was sure they were scratching the wood floors. I instantly became furious and marched upstairs ready to bust some butts. When I got to the top of the stairs, all was quiet and dark. I started opening bedroom doors only to find all the boys sleeping soundly. I thought, wow, that was a vivid dream. To my chagrin, it happened a couple of months later and became more and more frequent until it was almost a weekly event. I was speaking about this with my neighbor and she got a funny look on her face. I asked her what was wrong. She said, I don't want to scare you, but when my sister, who's clairvoyant, was over, she looked up at that window, pointing to one of the boys' rooms, and said, she has company. I asked her what she saw, and she said she saw a man and a woman in old-timey clothes looking back at her. At some point, I decided I wanted to share my experiences with my sons. When I did, they all broke out with their own stories. Some of them had been touched, some just heard noises or felt their beds being shaken. Here are a few more memorable ones in my mind. We being myself and 7 or 8 teenagers filling up every square inch of the place, were all just visiting and half-watching Family Guy. My youngest decided he was tired and wanted to go up to bed. Away he went, only to return a short time later with pale skin and wide eyes. He said that he had closed his bedroom door and gotten into the top bunk. That's when he heard the door handle turn, heard the door open and shut again, and then felt someone sit on the bottom bunk. He figured it was his brother, and leaned over the bunk and yelled something trying to scare him. He said he froze because there was no one there. He was completely alone, hence the wide eyes and pale skin. He truly looked like he'd seen a ghost. One morning I woke up to find my boys and one of their friends sleeping everywhere in the living room, which was not allowed in our house. I woke up my second eldest and asked what the deal was. He said they couldn't sleep upstairs because something was opening and closing all the doors, all night. He said they'd wake up and prop things in front of the doors to keep them from slamming, only to be awoken up again by the same slamming sound. He said, Ma, those ghosts keep moving the stuff we put in front of the doors. We decided to sleep down here. I couldn't blame them. There are so many stories, but I'll just tell one more. My oldest subsequently joined the Marine Corps, and on his month-long furlough after his Iraq tour, he had a very creepy encounter. He said he was laying on his stomach and reading from his laptop when he felt something sit on the bed. He said he looked over and saw the indention of a person sitting there, and said out loud, "F ghosts." A second later, he said he was being pushed into the bed. He spoke in the name of Jesus, and it got off of him. My final straw was on Halloween night. I was at the computer in the dining room, home alone. I felt something behind me. I turned and heard my name being said in an awful and sinister voice, and then the sound of something large falling down my staircase. It was so loud that I thought I'd find a broken dresser at the bottom, but nothing was there. I searched upstairs and outside for the cause of the crash, but nothing. I had my pastors and the elders of my church come bless my property and my home. There's been no strange activity since that day. I no longer live in that house, but one of my sons bought it. The house is still clean. This story comes from my girlfriend, who told me that a couple of months ago her mom was exiting an office that she works at in the middle of the night when she saw an apparition. She described it as looking like a very abnormally large black dog that was staring her down in the parking lot. Apparently the dog charged at her and vanished as it went through her, never to be seen again after that. Now, my girlfriend's mom is no stranger to the paranormal, and has tons of crazy stories, and this being the latest incident, she knew it meant something bad. She called my girlfriend frantically, asking her to check on her grandpa, who they were taking care of for about a year at that point, but he was okay. 2 days later, however, he passed on. This also happened to my girlfriend's grandma on her mom's side, where she was outside and saw a large, black dog on the roof of her house staring her down until it jumped down and vanished into her as well. Her first husband died after she received this visit from the dog. From what I could take from the story, it seemed more immediate than just 2 days. It was the first I've ever heard of a large black dog figure appearing, and a few hours later my curiosity led me to searching for similar experiences online. I stumbled across mythology and folklore, speaking of how large black dogs and/or hellhounds are omens of death. Since I was 18 or so, I've been having dreams where I know it's a dream, but I cannot wake up. Once, I dreamed that I was sleeping in my bed at my parents' house, and suddenly I woke up in the dream, and everything was normal. TV on, door slightly open, but there was a weird feeling in the room, which I ignored. I tried to get back to sleep, but my conscience told me to turn my head to the door, which I did. It was slightly open again, but this time it was opening a little more every second that passed, and a dark presence was on the other side of the room. At this point, I freaked out, jumped out of my bed, and tried to get out of the room, but something was holding me back, and the path from my bed to the door seemed eternal. Suddenly, everything stopped, and I woke up again in the same position I dreamed of first, TV on, door slightly open. I was still dreaming, and the same thing happened again. Door slowly opening, and me trying to run away from the room through a never-ending path from my bed to the door, with a weird feeling of someone watching me all along. This was a cycle that happened a number of times, that I can't remember, but it was more than 4. I knew I was dreaming, but could not wake up. I was really scared. I tried to wake me up by yelling or hitting me in the dream. Nothing worked. I remember that in real life I was not in my parents' house, and therefore I was not in that bed. At that moment, when I remembered that, I woke up. I dreamed something like that a couple of weeks ago where I couldn't wake up even though I knew I was dreaming. I have no idea why this happens. This is a true story. When I was in high school, I had a friend who lived near our house. We would always walk from school to our homes. We were pretty close, and we talked about anything. One time, when we were walking along the road, she suddenly spoke and said that she smelled candles. It was a busy street, and it was only around 4 p.m., I think. I replied, "It must be from the truck." I said this because one had just driven past us when she said that. She had a serious face, which was unusual because she was more talkative between the two of us. She insisted that she could still smell it as we continued walking, but stopped after a while. Fast forward to the next day. It was Saturday and I had just woken up. I literally got goosebumps. I felt so shocked when I read her text. It said that her father had died. Do you also believe in superstitions? Here in our country, a smell of flower or candle indicates the death of a person. I hold this Celtic belief, which is that on Halloween night, the veil between our world and the world of the dead is thinner. So I'm pretty spooked on Halloween. This Halloween was pretty messed up for me. Nothing had ever happened on any Halloween before this one. The house I live in right now is not haunted. Everyone feels great in it. So on Halloween night, I took a nap. Weird sleep schedule. The doorbell kept ringing because kids wanted candles and treats. I wasn't alone, so other people were answering. Between two of those waking up for a couple seconds before going back to sleep moments, I had the weirdest experience. I hadn't turned the light off, so I saw it very clearly. It was so bizarre. I saw two little girls entering my room and just running around before disappearing. There are no kids in that house, but I was like, it's just me. Then something else happened at night when I was trying to sleep. I woke up and saw someone next to my bed facing me, entirely encompassed by shadow. I thought at first, oh, it's my boyfriend, but my boyfriend left 2 days before to work. He was pretty far away. So I started to realize that it wasn't him, and I just tried to turn on the light while I was panicking. No one. That happened just before this experience. I saw a shadow walking into my room, and I thought it was my boyfriend again, except it wasn't because he was again not here. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I could move and everything. I experienced it before, and it's definitely not that. I had a dream last night that I was being shown a series of gorillas in cages. In the dream, my brother told me that they had developed new technology to allow me to feel the touch of their hands through the cages. Sort of like the suits in Ready Player One. Weird dream logic. Anyway, I'm being dragged through the enclosure and one of the gorillas strokes my head, neck, and back. The thing is, I could actually feel this sensation in my body. I have never, ever felt anything palpably in a dream. My reaction to the sensation was a deep-set revulsion. The creepy thing is that it felt like there was a creature surveying my sleeping body, stroking it like a piece of meat to play with, while imbuing my dreams with an excuse as to why it was happening. Stranger still was that when I opened my eyes after the dream, I could feel this huge hand cupped over my mouth. I felt completely powerless to the creature. It was as though it had little tangible intelligence, but I could feel its feral nature enjoying the moment. It felt like something had lain down behind me in bed. Every time I opened my eyes, I could feel its massive hand over my mouth. Chalk it up to the mind playing tricks, or whatever. It was creepy and intimidating. Around 2013, my senior year of high school, my mom, brother, and 2 friends planned a Halloween ghost hunt type deal. We headed out to this park that was notoriously haunted. We even made sure to go at 3 a.m. to get maximum results. One friend brought her camera and got tons of orbs. Not the most solid evidence, but pretty cool regardless. My brother decides to sit on the end of the pier on the lake and do some recordings. He ends up getting the clearest, creepiest EVP I've ever heard in my life. About 2 minutes in, he asks a question. It goes quiet, and you can clearly hear a man's voice yelling out, "Don't shoot," followed by a few seconds of silence, and then an agonized groan. None of us heard this until we played it back in the car. I remember shivers running down my spine, and I started crying because I was so scared of it. I still have the recording, but I only ever show it to people that I trust. That wasn't the only strange thing that happened that night, but it was by far the one that sticks with us all the most. My brother has only listened to it that one time in the car afterward. He refuses to listen to it again. It's been 6 years. I was wondering if anyone could offer their thoughts, or an explanation on a paranormal experience that I had as a child. When I was 11, my younger sister passed away from a very sudden death. Months before this incident, I had a vision in the middle of the night that I had never made sense of until recently. I had woken up and saw a floating orb of white light in my room. Inside of it was a young child, around 4, maybe 5 years old, the same age as my late sister, with short hair, wearing a Victorian-style nightgown. I came close to it and stared at it for a minute or two, and then went back to sleep. The next day, I was filled with overwhelming anxiety and the feeling of someone's presence in the house. Only years after this vision and the death of my sister have I thought that this could possibly be some sort of omen or warning.